A word count target 487, 450 to 500. The first blow landed without warning. I curse you and your damn crusade. I hope your documentary tanks. Maybe then you'll finally come home. Celia's voice cracked through the low murmur of the restaurant, loud enough that forks paused midair at nearby tables. She stood there, eyes burning, her hands still clenched around the back of her chair before she shoved it in and stormed toward the door. For a second, I just sat there. The cake, white frosting with my name in neat block letters, was untouched. The champagne sat sweating in its bucket, cork still in. 7 days from the premiere of the most dangerous exposé I'd ever worked on, and my wife had just thrown a grenade in the middle of my birthday dinner. I picked up my glass and took a slow sip, trying to keep my face neutral. My chest, though, it felt like someone had driven a spike right through it. Illegal weapons trafficking, black market routes, corrupt officials. That's what the film was about. But now all I could hear was her voice. Maybe then you'll finally come home. The server hovered at the edge of the table. Should I? Leave it, I said, sharper than I meant. He nodded and backed away. I'd been in worse situations, gunfire in Yemen, tear gas in Belarus. But this was personal. My mind kept trying to rewind to when things were simpler. That first year, we'd burned through midnight coffee debating ethics, tossing around ideas for what became Third Line. She was the legal brain, I was the field lunatic with a camera. We fought for the same vision, uncompromising truth. I'd film. She'd keep us from getting sued into oblivion. We were a team. Now, we barely talked without circling the same fights. She said I was chasing stories to avoid living a real life. I said she'd gone soft. And here we were, her words still echoing, people still glancing over like they were watching a slow-motion car crash. The check came. I signed it without looking, drained the last of the drink, and reached for the small gift box by my plate. She'd left it there when she walked out. Inside was a vintage brass compass, polished to a soft glow. I ran my thumb over the engraving on the back. Wherever you go, remember where you belong. Love, see. I sat there staring at it, the weight of it in my palm heavier than it should have been. For a second, I almost laughed at the irony. 7 days before the biggest gamble of my career, she was already calling my bluff. The champagne stayed unopened. The cake never left the table. I slipped the compass into my jacket pocket, tossed a few bills for the tip, and walked out without looking back. This sets the immediate fracture between Logan and Celia, planting the seed for the conflict over his obsession with the work versus his marriage. Would you like me to move straight into scene 2 with the same pacing and tone? I left the restaurant with the compass still in my pocket, the night air cutting sharp against my face. By the time I got home, I couldn't sit still. I poured a whiskey, sat at my desk, and stared at the wall until my mind started drifting backward, before the fights, before the cold silences. We'd met in Chicago, at a journalism conference. I was there pushing my first war photo spread. She was on a panel about international law and media ethics. She cornered me afterward, hit me with a dozen questions about liability, sourcing, truth in hostile territory. She was smart, relentless, and not the least bit impressed by my combat reporter mystique. That was the hook. A month later, we were meeting up in coffee shops after work, trading drafts and case files. She'd sit cross-legged on my couch, red pen in hand, dissecting my copy while I scrolled through her contracts, looking for loopholes she might have missed. We weren't just dating. We were sharpening each other's work. When we launched Third Line, she wasn't a side note. She was half the engine. She drafted every agreement, negotiated rights with sources halfway across the world, handled the funders who wanted control without calling it that. I shot in Syria with a busted shoulder because I trusted her to keep the lights on and the lawyers off our backs. We ran lean, but we ran honest. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing the limits. Every win just made me want the next bigger one. I started chasing stories deeper into conflict zones, saying yes to assignments that burned through cash faster than we could raise it. We had donors lined up, but the second someone hinted at pulling a punch to keep them happy, I walked. She didn't. When the numbers started tilting red, she took a compliance role at a Fortune 100 defense contractor, said it was temporary, said it would give us breathing room. She didn't talk about how much it gutted her to work inside the same machine she'd spent years challenging. I didn't ask. The cracks widened slowly, her voice tight when she reminded me rent didn't pay itself, my shrug when she warned that alienating funders could sink us. I told her fear was poison in this work, and she told me obsession was worse. Every time she hinted at dialing back, I pushed harder. I told myself she'd signed up for this, that she knew who I was. I didn't notice when her questions stopped being about my stories and started being about the cost of them. I didn't see the resentment stacking up like ammo in a belt. Looking back, it's easy to pinpoint the moment I should have heard her. 6 months before my last trip, standing in our kitchen, her saying, "You can't keep running into fires and expect me to just wait here with a bucket of water." I laughed it off. That laugh was the fuse. And now here I was, staring at the compass on my desk, wondering if she'd meant it as a reminder or a warning. The compass was still on my desk when I heard the front door click. Celia's heels tapped against the hardwood, measured, almost rehearsed. She didn't even take her coat off before speaking. "So, that's how you celebrate your birthday? Sit there like a martyr and make me the villain?" I looked up from the glass in my hand. "Pretty sure you handled that yourself." Her laugh was short, sharp. "Right. Because heaven forbid Logan Hawthorne take responsibility for anything outside a war zone." I stood. "You walked into a restaurant and wished my life's work would fail. What exactly was I supposed to do? Toast to that?" She dropped her bag on the chair. "Your life's work has been eating our actual life alive for years. You hide behind these noble causes because you don't want to face the fact that we're barely a marriage anymore." "Barely?" I stepped closer. "We built Third Line together. You knew what this was from the start." "I knew what you were," she shot back. "Passionate, brave, obsessive. I thought that would calm down once we had some stability. But it's always another story, another trip, another risk." Her voice caught. "You promised after Nicaragua we'd settle down. Then it was Yemen, then Belarus. When does your war end?" I could feel the heat rising in my neck. "When the stories stop needing to be told. You said you believed in this." "I used to," she said, her eyes glistening now. "But belief doesn't pay the mortgage. Belief doesn't start a family. Belief doesn't sit at a table with me for more than a week without a camera in its face." "You think this is about money?" I asked. "I've turned down more funding than most filmmakers ever see just to keep this clean." She shook her head slowly. "No, I think it's about control. You'd burn everything down just to prove you're right." "That's not fair. It's the truth." She grabbed her bag again, slinging it over her shoulder like she couldn't stand to be in the room another second. I wanted to stop her, to tell her she was wrong, but the words jammed in my throat because part of me knew she wasn't. Her hand was on the doorknob when she looked back. "One day, you're going to realize you can't love the work and hate what it costs you. I hope I'm still here when that happens." The door shut behind her with a dull thud. The house went silent except for the ticking of the kitchen clock, each second louder than the last. I sank back into my chair, the compass cold in my palm, and wondered if she'd just declared the war I'd never wanted to fight. I didn't sleep. By 2 a.m., I was at my editing bay, the glow from the monitors throwing shadows across the room. The cut of the documentary was sitting there on the timeline, tight, clean, built to punch, and completely hollow. I hit play. Images of shipping containers, soldiers with blurred faces, backroom deals caught on hidden cameras, all of it damning. All of it detached. I'd built a flawless case and stripped myself out of it entirely. Celia's words kept looping in my head. "You'll burn everything down just to prove you're right." I poured another 2 fingers of whiskey, leaned back, and asked myself the question I'd avoided for months, maybe years. What had chasing this cost me? Not the money, not the bruises, the real cost. I scrubbed through the footage again. Yemen, dust thick in my lungs, a man holding a photo of his dead brother. Belarus, riot police tearing through crowds, the taste of pepper spray on my tongue. But I wasn't in the frame, not once. No one could see the toll in my face, the weight in my shoulders. I'd made sure of it. For the first time, I thought maybe that was the problem. I opened a new sequence, dropped in the raw interview files we'd never planned to use, the nights in cheap hostels, the arguments with border guards, the footage of me coughing my guts out after a tear gas hit. Then, I recorded a new track. Not narration, confession. I talked about the adrenaline high and the crash after, about the lies we tell ourselves to keep going, the way you justify missing anniversaries and funerals, about watching people die in front of you, and then editing the footage like it's just another shot to match for color. My voice shook more than once, but I didn't stop. By sunrise, the documentary was something else entirely. It still had the corruption, the evidence, the receipts, but now it had blood in it. Mine. Raffi came in first, rubbing his eyes. He stopped cold when he saw the new cut playing. What the hell is this? This, I said, is the truth we've been avoiding. Mina arrived 20 minutes later, coffee in hand. She didn't even sit down before saying, "Logan, this isn't a documentary. It's a confession." Exactly. She glanced at Raffi, then back at me. You realize we'd have to scrap half the old version? We've got 5 days. I leaned forward. We've been telling other people's stories for years. It's time we tell ours, the messy, painful truth of it. Raffi blew out a long breath. Mina shook her head slowly, like she was already calculating the sleepless nights ahead. Finally, she said, "You're insane." "Maybe," I replied. "But it's the only version worth showing." They didn't agree right away, but they didn't walk out either. And that was enough to start tearing the whole thing apart. By the third night of the rebuild, my eyes felt like sandpaper. I shut down the monitors, grabbed my jacket, and stepped out into the cold. I didn't want to go home, not yet, so I ducked into O'Malley's, the kind of place where the jukebox was older than the bartender. That's when I saw him. Grant Hale. He was nursing a beer at the far end, watching a muted basketball game. We'd crossed paths for years, festivals, panels, the occasional verbal sparring match. He once called me the patron saint of moral grandstanding. I'd called him a sellout with a press pass. He looked over, smirked. "Well, if it isn't St. Logan, you slumming it?" I slid onto the stool next to him. "You always this charming, or is it just the lighting?" He chuckled, took a sip. "Heard you're cooking up something risky. Word gets around." "Depends on your definition of risky." He gave me a long look. "The kind where you put your guts on the table and hope the audience doesn't spit them back at you, or the kind where you burn your life down for the headline." I didn't answer right away. He leaned in. "I used to be you. Couldn't see the difference between the work and my worth. Nearly lost my marriage, my health, everything. Thought it was noble. It wasn't. It was just me refusing to admit I was afraid to be ordinary." I stared at the beer in front of me. "Truth matters." "Yeah," he said. "But it's not worth it if you destroy yourself chasing it. The audience doesn't just want facts. They want to feel what you've lost. Otherwise, it's just noise." I tried to deflect. "You giving me creative notes now? Call it survival notes." He drained the rest of his beer and stood. "If you want to save your marriage, stop being right. Start being real." I watched him walk out, the door swinging shut behind him. The words sat in my chest like a stone. On the way back to the office, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Celia's number. My thumb hovered over the call button. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. "Hey," I said, my voice lower than I meant. "I know you don't want to hear from me right now, but I'm trying. I just wanted you to know that." I hung up before I could talk myself out of it. Then I went back upstairs and turned the lights on. There was still work to do, but for the first time, I wasn't thinking about the film alone. 3 days before the premiere, I came home to find Celia in the kitchen. No warning, no call, just there, leaning against the counter like she'd been deciding whether to stay or bolt. "I shouldn't have said those things," she started, voice low, "but I meant the fear behind them." I set my keys down. "You want to see what I've been working on?" She hesitated, then nodded. We sat in the edit room. I hit play on the latest cut. The screen filled with grainy border footage, voiceovers of my own breathing between interviews, me coughing after tear gas in Belarus. My commentary bled over it, raw, unpolished, every admission I'd avoided for years. She didn't move. Her arms were crossed at first, but slowly they loosened. At one point, her eyes flicked to me instead of the screen, like she was checking if I was really letting people see this. When the credits rolled, I muted the speakers. "You're finally telling the truth," she said softly. "Not just about the world, but about yourself." I tried to read her face. "Does it change anything?" "It changes how I see the man who made it." She looked away for a second. "But it doesn't erase the rest. I'm not asking for a clean slate." "I know," she said, standing, "and I'll come to the premiere, but we talk after. No cameras, no crisis, just us." "That's fair." She grabbed her coat. For a moment, it felt like she might leave without another word. Then she stepped closer, just enough for me to catch the faint smell of her perfume. "Don't make me regret it," she said, and walked out. I sat there with the monitors still glowing, the room quiet except for the hum of the hard drives, wondering if this was the start of a truce, or just a pause before the next round. Festival night hit like a gut punch the second I stepped into the theater lobby. Reporters, critics, activists, they were all there, jostling for position under the hanging banners. Cameras flashed, and every lens felt like it was asking the same question. "You sure about this?" Celia stood off to the side, black dress, hair pulled back, eyes on me, but giving nothing away. I gave her the smallest nod before heading to the stage. When the house lights dimmed, I took the mic. "We set out to tell one story," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet, but found another. "This is about damage, about truth, and about the cost. No preamble, no pleasantries." I stepped back and the film began. The opening shot wasn't a war zone. It was me, slumped in a hotel room chair, face lined and unshaven, talking about why I'd missed my own anniversary. The room stayed silent as the footage rolled. Border crossings, corruption deals, interviews with whistleblowers whose eyes darted off camera. My voiceover threaded through all of it. Not heroic, not detached, but cracked open. I didn't watch the screen. I watched the audience. Arms crossed, slowly uncrossed. People leaned forward. A few scribbled notes, but never looked down for long. When the credits finally rolled, there was a pause, thick, heavy. Then applause broke like a wave. It wasn't polite, it was raw. Some people were on their feet. A few had tears running down their cheeks. I stepped into the lobby, lightheaded. That's when a man in a gray suit approached, hand extended. "Malcolm Reed," he said. "Reed Trust for Investigative Arts. That was fearless work." "Appreciate it," I said cautiously. "I want to fund your next project," he went on, "but with conditions, co-director for balance and biannual oversight reviews." A year ago, I'd have told him where to stick it. Tonight, I shook his hand. "You've got a deal." He smiled like he'd just watched a man finally put down his sword. I glanced across the lobby, catching Celia watching the exchange. No smile, but no wall either. Just a measured look, like she was weighing the man in front of her against the one she'd left standing in that restaurant. The theater staff started ushering people out. I stood there in the warm hum of voices, feeling, for the first time in a long time, that the war I'd been fighting might finally be shifting. We got home just before midnight, the sound of the front door closing hanging in the air between us. Celia dropped her coat on the back of a chair, turned to face me, and crossed her arms. "The film was brave," she said, steady but not warm. "But do you know what's braver?" I leaned against the wall. "I'm listening. Staying. Showing up every day for someone else's needs, not just your cause." I let the words sit there. "You think I haven't been here?" Her jaw tightened. "Physically? Sure. But your head's been in a war zone for 10 years, Logan. Even tonight, you were still working, still chasing the next step before this one's even over." I moved closer. "I want both, you and the work, but I see now I can't have both without changing." She studied me, like she was looking for cracks. "What does changing actually mean?" "No disappearing for months without planning. Protected time, that's ours, not the world's. And..." I took a breath. "We revisit the baby conversation. Now, not later." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "That's a lot of promises for one night." "They're not promises," I said. "They're rules. I want to build something with you, not just for you to come home to after the fact." She didn't look away. "And when the next big story comes along, when someone waves another must-tell crisis in your face, I won't take it unless we decide together." That got a short, humorless laugh. "You? Ask permission?" "Not permission," I said. "Partnership." She was quiet for a long beat, the only sound the faint hum of the fridge. Finally, she said, "I'm not saying yes to any of this tonight." "I'm not asking you to," I replied. She stepped past me toward the hallway, pausing just long enough to add, "But I'm not saying no either." I watched her disappear down the hall, the light spilling from the bedroom door, and felt, for the first time in months, like maybe the fight wasn't about who would win, but whether we'd both stay in it long enough to find a way forward. 6 months later, my desk looked different. No half-packed go bag in the corner, no stack of visa applications. Just 2 monitors, a legal pad, and a mug Celia had bought that said, "Ask me about my sources." I was mentoring a group of 20-somethings on Zoom, walking them through a cut of their first field piece. The footage was shaky, but the story was there. When we wrapped, I shut the laptop and sat back, listening to the quiet. No gunfire, no sirens, just the hum of the fridge and the clink of dishes from the kitchen. Celia stepped in, drying her hands on a towel. Dinner's almost ready. How's the new case? I asked. She smiled faintly. Challenging, but it's good. Different. She'd left the defense contractor 3 months ago for a nonprofit focused on international humanitarian law. Less money, more meaning. I recognized the look in her eyes when she talked about it. It was the same one I'd had when we started Third Line. We'd started trying for a baby, but without the silent stopwatch we used to live under. No talk of once this project wraps or after the next grant cycle. Just our own timeline. Over dinner, I pulled the compass from my pocket. The brass was worn from months of being thumbed over during edits, phone calls, and moments I wanted to remind myself where the center was. I finally know what direction matters, I said. Celia reached across the table and took my hand, placing it gently on her belly. It was still flat, but the meaning landed before I could ask. Then, let's make sure we're both headed there, she said, together. I held her gaze. For once, there was no deadline in the room, just the space to let it sink in. The kitchen smelled like garlic and rosemary. Celia stood at the stove, humming under her breath, while I chopped vegetables beside her. The camera on the counter was rolling. Not for the world this time, just for us. I'd been filming little pieces of life. Her in slippers, me burning toast, the two of us laughing over some inside joke that wouldn't land with anyone else. Later, in the nursery, I knelt beside a half-assembled crib, the instruction manual sprawled open. Celia leaned in the doorway with a mug of tea, smiling in that quiet way that said she was both amused and glad I was the one on the floor with an Allen wrench. Most days now, my work happened from this house. I mentored a young journalist in Nairobi over video calls, guiding her through her first investigative piece. She called me the calm voice in the storm. I didn't tell her that was new for me. At night, after the dishes were done and the lights were low, I'd sit on the edge of our bed, the compass resting on the nightstand within arm's reach. I used to think changing the world meant going to war with it. Turns out, it starts by coming home. The screen in my head faded to black on that compass, and if this were a film, the last frame would hold just long enough for the words to appear. For C. For the truth that costs nothing and means everything.